Are we live now?
We're about
Yes.
to go live. We're setting up.
I'm trying this without my headphones, Randy.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, because my daughter went to her room. She was running around and listening to devices. But if I need the headphones, just let me know. If it's getting noisy in my house, let me know and I'll put them back on.
No, I think you're fine. And I think we're on. I can never tell. So, but
It says live.
we'll just talk. And
The red light is on.
hopefully people will be watching. Hello, everyone out there. Welcome to our up close Q&A. With me today is Aretha Sills.
Hello.
Who's right there. And we're going to be talking about improvisation. Aretha's been teaching for a while, and she's tours around and gives all kinds of workshops, and she's been to Seattle a few times. Maybe some of you out there have actually taken her workshops. So we're going to talk about a variety of different topics today and try to answer all the mysteries of improv. Well, maybe
Okay.
not.
All of them.
And I will be looking here in chat. So if you have questions or anything that you want to put out there, feel free to enter it. Hopefully I will see it. So Aretha's been teaching for a while and is very experienced, and again is the granddaughter of Viola Spolin, the daughter of Paul Sills. So she has a long history in the family business, so to speak,
Right.
and going way back, and is a fan and an expert, I would say, in improv history. Again, your presentations, things, if you ever get a chance to see them, community out there, do so, because it's really a great presentation. So anyway, welcome, Aretha.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we'll just chat for a while, and we'll see where the wind takes us.
All right.
So one thing that we were talking about just before coming on, so I want to make sure that we get to the thing you want to talk about, which is online teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's start there, because I was surprised to find out that you actually really like online teaching. And being an online teacher myself, it's okay, but I'm not I don't know, you get kind of excited about it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So what, I guess, looking back, when you started to go online, did you kind of know all along it would kind of work out, or did you have some trepidation about taking your classes online?
Well, it was definitely that kind of situation where you just had to jump in and do it, right? Because I actually had an ongoing workshop that I needed to finish online. At first, it got canceled in mid-March. I mean, by me, I canceled it for safety reasons. We were doing an improvisation for performance workshop, which is where we do the performance games that Paul loved to do of violas, and adding a few new ones that I like to do as well. But focusing on that and Viola's theory of the audience, and performing how to perform in front of people with the same amount of freedom that you have in workshop. Is really, how to perform and stay out of the head and in the space. How to be in the present time when you're performing, because it becomes a greater challenge. And when you can do that, Paul ended every workshop with a performance, because he really felt like you could learn so much through the workshop, and then through the performance was this different experience. So we got 2/3 of the way through the workshop. I think we had 2 more workshops to go, and we were just flying about the space. Like the players at that point were so completely free with each other, and it was really beautiful. And then, nope, we can't meet again. So I wrote them all, and I said, I'm so sorry. This was before people were even aware about, the curve and all that stuff, flattening the curve. I had to send out, it was so early in March, I had to send out information about flattening the curve. And we were all disappointed, and I said we'd meet again as soon as possible. I'd reconvene the workshop as soon as possible, and we'd put on our performance then. And then gradually a month or two went by, and we're like, okay, that's not happening. So we're going to do it online. And so it was just really this sort of jump in. So we did a few workshops and played around. And then we did a performance online. And it was pretty much just jump right in and do it. And let's go, let's do it. There was no time to really think about it, and make sure everything would work. But we found that most things have been working really well, and which is a huge surprise.
Right. Cool. In terms of, it seems like the Spolin work is so about building community and creating community. Do you find that that's, I have found it to be kind of a tough challenge because everyone's so sort of disconnected in their own little screen, in their own room. Are you finding that not to be true? You're able to find this communitas between people?
We are finding it. We are finding it in the virtual space. And not only is it so much about that community and that connection between people, it's also about it. There's so much about physical play in Spolin work, right? The proximity of the bodies in space, running around and playing, and to the best of our abilities. It's all because whatever we can do, but the nearness to each other and the bodies making shapes in the space and stage picture and give and take and the awareness of each other.
Right.
So important.
And so are you having people, have enough space so that you can see their whole body, or? Oh
yeah. Yeah. Well, we do it all. We basically do it all. So essentially that was my biggest fear, that we wouldn't be able, so that is the big question. How do we come together and create a collective where, like a setting for our scenes to take place when we're all in different locations? And that's been the big question. But I think it's a question for all of us right now, right? How do we create that? It doesn't, in class or out of class, we're all asking that question. And early on, my alumni were pretty resistant to it. We'd play a game and I'd ask an evaluation question, and the answer would be, but when we do this in person, this happens. And so quickly I realized I have to tamp that down. We can't go into that. That's not helpful. Because in Spolin, the evaluation questions are like about what's helpful and leave the rest. They're always very focused on the problem you're trying to solve. So what is the problem we're trying to solve? And Viola said that a game is a series of rules to keep the play going. So what is Zoom but our new rule to keep the play going? And so we, at the very top of workshop, I let them know that. And it's just been like, oh, okay, moving on. Like we talk about that. Here's the problem we need to solve. These are the tools we have to solve it. And so the form of the game again, and the fact that the limitations help us push beyond our own limits into the greater beyond. It's working with Zoom too. So we work with the limits of Zoom and have fun with them. And so that's, I just talk about that at the start of every workshop, and we gradually get there. And Viola, it's a teaching method. So we go back to I begin every workshop with the where game and different games to help bring people all into the same space, one object at a time, and then they use their fellow player's object and they see it and they show and don't tell, and until suddenly they are all in the theatrical reality of the where together, and then the where starts to work for them and create connections between them, and the audience sees it and responds to it, and we all the physical is the known, right? This says Viola, and through it we find our way to the unknown. So we do that anyway. So we just do it on Zoom now. And I go back to games like that are in theater games for the classroom, kids games, like where they're putting one object at it. Every player puts one object into the space. They're all in different locations, but they're actually creating this aware
Right.
in their diverse places, but the objects are set, so they know that where the sink is, and they know where the armoire is, and
Right.
they can enter in and play in them together. And so it's not just I've been working with during this period I've been working with beginners, and I've been working with very experienced people, both, and we will just do the same games because we all need to slow down and reorient ourselves in this new environment, to get us into the where and being able to share. And then the objects are flying between the squares. People are passing objects to each other and touching each other through. And it's amazing. We can play mirror on here, and people are finding it really moving, because they need that connection so bad that I'm almost afraid it's not going to be as powerful as when we return to the regular space, because right now it's like just when we need it the most. This is what we have and we need it. So that's been something I've been finding, that it's actually incredibly impactful for people.
Right.
To play together.
Have you had to adjust your curriculum in terms of this works, this doesn't work? And have you discovered things that you don't normally do in the workshop that work really well on Zoom?
Yeah. Definitely. There's some games I still haven't figured out, but I keep trying. And so I'll try certain games, and almost everything has worked. The main drawback with Zoom is that we can't order ourselves without numbering ourselves. And then if someone gets bumped off, then your order goes away. So we can't do certain games where we have to exactly know where our fellow player is, like stage picture. But we can do games where we're passing an object around in a circle. We can play ball and throw a space ball to each other. You just find ways to adapt it. You call out the name of the person you're sending it to. Right. You play in circle games, you play them in an order. That kind of thing. I've been finding I could not figure out New York was everyone's favorite traditional. For those who don't know, we start every Spolin game with a traditional children's game that's been passed down through the generations, and it's a huge part of our process because it as a warm up, it just gets everyone free enough to play, and then. So yeah, some of those games were hard to adapt, but I've been finding ways to adapt them, and not all of them for sure. Some have gone by the wayside. Still, Kitty Wants a Corner. No, I can't figure that one out yet. We will. We just figured out New York. It was really fun, because it's running and chasing and tagging, and tag games not yet. But there's some games that are coming to the forefront that I hadn't done a lot in workshop. Some exercises about peripheral vision, and so I've integrated. Well, so after the traditional game in a Spolin workshop, then we always do something Viola calls feeling self with self into a spacewalk. These are like walking or seated meditations that from that sort of anarchic play state, we go into a more focused state and bring ourselves into the same room with each other, back into our bodies, into the present time, and get into those are both states needed to play, right? And so, or to play freely. And so those have been beyond helpful, 100%. People are side coaching themselves using the spacewalks and the feeling self with self all the time. I'm always on my students to side coach themselves outside of workshop as well. But in this period where we're all very anxious, those tools have become completely essential for people as a way to just Viola says focus is meditation in action, right? To give ourselves a focus while we're going through this on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, certain things, Viola left us games that I swear to God were for Zoom. And one of them is like understanding peripheral vision and widening uh, our field of vision, because we are actually we're playing with each other in a two-dimensional space in a way as well. So we have to understand, we have to really see each other really well on screen. So that's been kind of fun to see what she left for us. That's
Right.
maybe didn't even make sense before, but now it's like, oh yeah, okay.
She was way ahead of her time.
She was. She was. It's like ridiculous how much she. I feel like in some ways she's constantly talking about the new, the unknown. So it's like,
Right.
who are we to not jump right into this, right? She was preparing us for this moment. I feel like, or for every unknown moment, really. So
Right.
it just still works.
So you think she would have embraced this technology?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, who knows? But it's definitely. I think the challenge is just figuring out Zoom too, because it'll every upgrade they'll take some tool away that you just used. You're like, oh no. So Zoom is like a side coach keeping us on our toes as well. So that's like, oh crap, now what do I do?
Right,
So it
there you go.
constantly, it's kind of it's breaking up some patterns that I had been developing in workshop. You get into a routine. So that's why I find it so exciting.
Wow, that's a total glass half full. That's
Yeah, and you know me, Randy. It's not always me. But I mean, the workshop has just been, we've just need each other right now. And so for me, the workshop has been also an experience of that. Like we talk about,
right.
we're,
So the focus on connection and reaching out and
yeah,
touching, even if it's over a screen, other people and personalities and
yeah.
souls.
When an object is passed between the screens and everyone sees it, when someone, just the other day, so there was some space spritzer came out in workshop, some space perfume or something came out in workshop, and through the screens we all saw the droplets and then that land on the person and them smell it. And I mean, it's even more incredible to us. That's part of it. It's like that's incredible enough in real life for people to remember seeing a space object for the rest of their lives, but to have it experienced in the virtual space, the ways that the space connects players I just think it's really profound.
Right. So do you see yourself then maintaining some sort of online component when we hopefully can get back together?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. My biggest problem with it right now is that there's more talk required
Right.
Than just playing experiential stuff. It's kind of like when you do a weekend, like a short workshop rather than like a 10-week, you have to sort of sum more stuff up and there's more talk required.
Right.
But I will definitely keep doing it. I find that, and I'm reaching new players are able to jump in, so that's exciting.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the outreach to other places,
Yeah,
other countries, things like that. Yeah, that is definitely a benefit to it, I think.
very exciting.
Yeah, cool. Well, there you go. I'm
Yeah.
actually kind of excited about teaching on Zoom.
There you go. Just do some wear games. Go to that. She even has an early. One of her early wear games is wear with floor plans.
All right.
So everyone, she was working really hard to get people into the same wear. It is the same problem.
Right.
And so I haven't done that one yet, but you can do it on the screen share. There's a whiteboard, and you could all do
Yeah, sure.
We do it. We do different. She developed games where you don't even need the floor plan, but
Right. And which one is it?
Draw it out. You just put emerging wear is helpful. In theater games for the classroom, there's a game called Relay Wear for kids that's super helpful. Do it with adults. I'm talking about working with adults, but.
Cool.
Going back to that book, there's a bunch of stuff in there that's helpful for adults too.
Cool. Yeah, I'll have to look. I'm looking at it right now. So.
Yeah. And the where game itself, those I think sometimes people forget how helpful those are at any level.
Right.
To go back in and be in the simplicity of it. I think it's actually why the 20th century trajectory of improv history, there was a rejection of that kind of work. So that, no, it's kid stuff. It's too easy. It's not. It's not easy to do that. And it's Viola, as Paul said, let me find the quote of Paul's. Paul said, without space substance to be used by fellow players as a space ball is tossed back and forth, it is as if language has no metaphor. So when I see, so to me, a lot of, there was a rejection of Spolin's work in the improv world as a teaching process, and as sort of, because that's sort of childish, I think, and the experiential nature of it, in favor of making rules to make a scene work, right? So if you just do these things, you can improvise,
Right.
rather than a series of exercises where what's needed to truly play with another person is built step by step, layer by layer, through experience. And I just think it's time for everyone to go back to that.
Yeah. Well, a couple things. One is, I think the reputation of it being childish comes from that notion of, the focus on play.
Yeah.
But one thing I've talked about in my classes a lot now is Viola didn't necessarily talk about play. She talked about the discipline of play, which is tough. To be disciplined enough to play really well versus just, oh, we're just playing these games and there's no consequences. True, but what's right behind that to me is what I find really interesting, giving, and generous in the Spolin work. For me,
Viola said that discipline is involvement.
right? Yeah,
And
and
so with that, all that's required is you're involved. And when you play, you're involved.
right, yeah,
Uh, your whole body from head to toe, when you're focused, is involved, and then all the crap of the culture can fall away, right? All the preconception, the prejudice, that stuff can go away, and there you are, and you can play in this space unencumbered by all that stuff. Now, that does take discipline, because you have to really focus to do that. It takes a lot of trust. It involves taking a risk and jumping in and playing, and it involves trust in the process,
right,
right? And it doesn't happen in one class. It may not even happen in a 10-week workshop with, there's the ecosystem of the workshop. There's all the stuff that has to happen for you to allow yourself to trust and play. And obviously that's
right,
that's not, it's not so easy.
right. Well, you have to take play and treat it seriously in a way.
Yeah.
Play very seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you have to understand that every single game she did, that she created, has an acting focus within it.
yeah,
And that will be discovered through the playing, but also because she doesn't tell you exactly what it is, you'll discover more in that.
right,
And so the players will always be showing us something new, which is what is the most exciting thing about it, right? If you follow the process, I think. If you stick to her teaching method,
right.
which can be difficult. It's challenging for everybody
Yeah,
to not critique and not talk about what's good or bad or what's working, or not have rules. Well, never do this, always do this, that kind of thing. That doesn't you know, it doesn't really fly in when you have a teaching method based on play. You have to have a different kind of critique and evaluation method, you know.
Right. Yeah. And I think that also hits on the point that, depending on who you're studying with, doing Spolin games, you're going to get different things from different people in terms of what they emphasize or don't emphasize. And again, for better or worse, it's a lot of it's subject to the interpretation, and I mean, but when it's done right, it feels good and it feels great because then you
Yeah.
kind of go, oh yeah, this is what it's supposed to feel like.
That's how you know. That's how you know it's working. If it feels good and it's refreshing. And I think that's why it has been really great for online play because we're still playing games and we need that. We need that. What if Viola? There's a phrase of Viola's like it's like focus is like a vacation from your everyday self, right? God, do we need that right now, right? So the focus is helping us get out of our own way, get out of our own heads, if only for a couple hours. And so I think that's why it's been working online, amazingly enough.
Huh. Well, I'll have to drop in sometime and
Our desperation is
that.
part of the game, right?
Right.
It's getting hard. We're more and more stressed out every week. I noticed at workshop. For a while there, we thought things were getting better, and then things are, just keep gradually getting worse and worse in our country. So we talk about that. We read Martin Buber. I try to read, I read things that hopefully will help us deal with this time period.
Right.
You know,
Wow.
there's a
Yeah.
lot, there's a lot, there's more reading going on. Although I always try to do readings in workshop of Paul and Viola and bring their words in, always. But just right now, we need to hear from them.
Yeah. Well, definitely their uh, words and wisdom are definitely much needed in this time. And also, I mean, finding one positive thing I'm finding in terms of online teaching and putting together stuff is finding games that in my in-person teaching I would not necessarily consider, but trying stuff because like, oh, this could work online. So
Yeah,
like I've been using a lot of stuff from the theater games for the lone actor,
yeah,
and just pulling those out because and again games I wouldn't necessarily teach in a in-person session just because got all this other stuff to do, but it's kind of that's the fun part for me is rediscovering some of this stuff,
yeah.
and finding its application in this environment, and when we can all be in a space together, it'll be interesting to see what of that I can then take back into the classroom or into the workshop.
Right.
Um, so, so
That's a
definitely,
book. That's a book everyone needs to have right now. And
yeah,
there are things in there that I do use in an in-person workshop. I just turn them into a spacewalk.
right,
Or like there's certain exercises that are for the solo player that I found to be so great for creating a character physically or something like that. I just have people do them as a spacewalk, like in a group. So
right,
they can go back and forth.
right, cool. And
Yeah.
yes, I'll hold it again for people that are watching who want theater games for the lone actor.
Yeah,
Uh,
you need that one right now. It's about side coaching the self into the present time, and it was edited by Paul Sills and Carol Sills, and they designed it was posthumously published by Viola, I think, or after she had her stroke.
right.
So they were the editors, and they designed it to be small so you could put it in your pocket and take it where, like, to an audition or take
Yeah.
it portable as need, pull it out as needed.
Yeah, no, it's useful. I've been playing with it myself, while marks and things. Um, yeah, it's yeah, very useful. I want to go back to how do I want to? I guess I'll tackle them separately. So one with is, and this is something that you've included in your presentation, I've talked about before, in terms of Viola's purpose, in terms of what she was doing, and I know she did theater with kids, and
Yeah.
so she had a theatrical aspect to her work, but is it fair to say that her main goal was not necessarily creating theater, but working with creating community?
No.
Yeah.
It's interesting. That has sort of come to be the line about Viola, but it was always about theater.
Okay.
It was always about theater. It was about both. But she came from, she started out as a social worker working with Neva Boyd, who was a great theorist of the uses of play in education. And she was working with community groups. And so Viola was working with whoever, after she worked with Neva Boyd, which was at Hull House and also Neva Boyd's house. So it was, Neva Boyd was part of the Hull House community in Chicago, but she would rent space there just like Viola. Like they weren't technically part of the Hull House programs, but they were part of the Hull House community of progressive educators and social reformers. Viola, it was this dual thing. Viola was like born to be in the theater. She was like putting on shows when she was 8 years old. And her father was a Chicago cop, and he would moonlight guarding the opera house. And she would get to go see the operas and be on opera detail. She would like be a background person in the operas, and she would see these huge productions. And she was she just was like, she was just born to be in the theater. And while she was getting, like after she worked with Neva Boyd, she immediately had Paul, very young. She got married and had Paul. And then she had her second son, Billy, and William Sills. And didn't work for a while, but then she immediately began, as soon as she could. She was in DePaul's night school studying theater. She went to New York to study with the group theater when her boys were very young. She worked with Charlotte Corpening, who was a major children's theater person, and she was just, at this point, I think she was divorced, so she was like a single mom. She was just getting theater education in any way she could, and she was also working a lot. There were Russian emigres in Chicago teaching Stanislavski, and she was working with doing all this theater stuff. And so her work, when she became when she was doing the social work that she was doing in the community, and then with the WPA, it was all, she was teaching dramatics. She was teaching theater, and her goal was to teach theater to the everyday person, the average person, because that's what, she was taught working with Neva Boyd, and that they believed creativity was a human right, So it's really, there's this very impassioned part of a letter she wrote to David Shepard. In 1955, around that, I think it's 55. He was talking about writing a book on improvisational theater, and she was like, "Hold up there, fella! I haven't written my book yet. What you're doing is my work. That work you guys are doing is my work. You may not know it. What Paul was doing with you was my work." And Paul, of course, I mean, I'm not saying they weren't crediting her, but they weren't waiting for her to work through her system, right? Well, Paul was, but so David thought, he could write a book. She said no. And she made it super clear. It's this amazing passage, and I've read it at a couple of these things. So let me see what I can remember about it. She says, that she was taught by this great woman, Neva Boyd, that creativity is a human right. And she worked to develop this system for average people, for everyday people to learn acting. And that only she could have done it because she was trained as a creative group worker and she was a theater person. She was trained in the theater, and that was her life's, that was it. She was the only person who could have created theater games for those two reasons. And that, I think so, there has, I think through, I mean, Second City's messaging a little bit has been like, oh, she created games to help inner city kids connect and stuff like that. And yes, they did that. But I think that was a messaging that was out there for a while. So I'm trying to bring it back to no, really, it was this merger, and that was her stated. It was this merger between the fact that she was a social worker, a group worker, as they called it, and all about the community, and a theater person. And the book is Improvisation for the Theater, you know. So these and not only that, it's been in use in the theater this whole time, even as the improv world forgot about it. It's been in every major acting school, every you know, it's invaluable. She's considered, you know, up there now in the theater world with all the other great 20th century theater figures. But only, you know, improv is a little, they're finally remembering, oh, look where we came from. So that's great.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it really is the theater, and it's both.
All right. Yeah, I'm reminded, you know, wouldn't it be great to have a WPA now? Right.
Oh man, I know.
You know, supporting the arts and creativity. And, I mean, there's some of it, I suppose, but not nearly enough.
Not in this country.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because in Italy, after COVID and recovering COVID, the government was putting a bunch of money into the arts, and you know, and some of that has happened here, but again, not enough.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what would come out of all of that.
A new WPA.
Yeah.
It's such a, it's so radical an idea to us right now that it's just, that's what's so shocking, you know. And even then Viola wasn't making much, but it was the first time she was like making a paycheck that enabled her to do that. It did a lot of good for her, you know. She was always scraping by. But that was there's letters for excited letters writing about how, you know, making a little bit of money every week, how helpful that was to do her work. And it was crucial because Neva Boyd also suggested her to do it, and she was able to develop her work that way by working so much. So when you think of the progressive reforms that came out of Hull House, that, you know, and obviously, you know, we can talk about their failures as well. That's part that needs to be part of the conversation. But what they did at Hull House, creating this whole movement in a place where activism happened and laws got changed, you know, and it's important to go back and look at what they did, because there was a huge boom in the 20th century of creativity and prosperity that came out of those reforms.
Right.
And because people who weren't normally educated were educated.
Right.
Every kid in the neighborhood went to Hull House and got some education in the arts and this and that. And it changed. We can't underestimate how important that was. Right? So now we have to do that. That's my basic, you know, right? It's that changed everything. For Viola's family, they were Russian Jewish immigrants, right? Her parents were. And the kids were first generation neighborhood kids. People forget that. They were her kids, and her generation were the ones who were helped by Hull House.
Right. Well, it seems like Hull House, philosophically it was a great place where you could try things out and things worked or they didn't work. In the same way that, like with the compass developing at the University of Chicago, where the University of Chicago had its own kind of sort of creative way of being
Yeah.
that would be tough to find now, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the University of Chicago, Viola was in the right place at the right time to be at Hull House, and Paul was in the right place at the right time, well, to be at Hull House and University of Chicago. I mean, it's pretty incredible because they were both places that attracted every smart person for
Yeah.
miles and miles and miles, right? So there was just this huge flourishing of that sense that anything's possible, and let's do it together. Let's put on a show in the barn, right? That was.
Yeah, my joke around University of Chicago at that time was you couldn't throw a rock without hitting a genius.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's kind of like they just had a little like college theater group, and look who was in it. I mean, it's a little nuts.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, yeah, right place, right time for sure. Uh, uh, cool. So, in terms of, I guess, an overview, one of the things I think the audience might be interested in is talking about Paul a little bit in terms of the arc of his career and his life.
Yeah.
In terms of, did as things developed, got built up, fell apart, lots of different enterprises, things like that. How do you feel like he evolved over the years?
Paul?
Yeah.
I mean, that's such a big question. How much time we got left? 15 minutes. Paul always wanted to get a show going no matter what. I've never known anyone who had that kind of drive to create theater constantly. If he wasn't doing it, he was talking about it, or he had a book that he was cutting into a story theater script, with little marks in it, and he was reading his philosophy and comparing it to Viola. Paul was it's hard. He was a deeply serious person, and he was in some ways quite religious, and in other ways he wasn't. He was not a joiner. He wasn't gonna ever commit fully to one belief system, but he had a side of him that when Viola was not. She was like absolutely not. But she was interested in consciousness and spiritual, not the spirituality side of it. But Paul was always like that. When he was at University of Chicago, those stories, I mean, they were at Playwrights Theater, they were doing the most serious theater. They were in one of the first production of Brecht's Chalk Circle was in the United States. It was because of him, because they beat a New York group to it, but it was in Chicago. And he that was him. It was always, he saw through to the essence of things and wasn't interested in anything that wasn't truthful. And that sounds like a cliche, but oh my God, he was like an eagle. He was like he literally had this truth detector, and you couldn't get away with a thing with him. It was impossible being a child sometimes. Fuck. Shit, he knows what I'm doing. But so like the evolution, and I think, even when he had this Second City, like, so he was always interested in the theater, but then he got interested in the cabaret form, partially because of the fire laws in Chicago, and you had to do a cabaret. And then I think they found a lot of liberation in that, but eventually it wouldn't, like, Second City stopped, because of the political situation at the time in the mid-60s and Kennedy's assassination and the civil rights movement and the beginnings and the Vietnam War and all that stuff, and deeper into the 60s as the Vietnam War progressed. He became really politically more radicalized when he had been, he always was politically minded, but it became, he wrote there was a point in 1964, there's an interview with him where he was still at Second City, but he was thinking of changing it to a pure theater game format. And then he decided he decided just to leave. And he wrote that he left because the soul of the American people is beyond satire. It's just like Paul, that it just wasn't enough for him. It couldn't respond to the times for him. And satire wasn't enough for him. And so then, interestingly, he moved into fairy tales, where which might sound silly, but the depth and the richness of the culture is in there, right? Of whatever culture whose fairy tales are, coming
Right.
from. Eventually, he did folk tales from around the world, but he started with Grimm's. And
Right.
they somehow those folk tales spoke to people about what they were going through in '68. And he never stopped looking for that, and he had no interest in the commercial theater after a certain point. I think he did for a while, and then he was like, fuck them, because they're gonna shut you down. The producer's gonna come in and make a decision that takes away what matters about the show. And so someone once said to me, had he been in Russia, he would have had a state theater, right? And he would have been, but he would be able to do shows that everyone would have seen for the rest of his life. But because this is America and it's a primarily commercial theater is a commercial form, he couldn't live within those bounds. And so and you see now why that's so hard. I mean, we can see that because those limits have caused so many problems in our theater communities, right? Who gets to speak? Who gets to perform? Who gets to direct? All those things. How do we stay afloat when there's no state support, when there's nothing, but Paul, I feel like Paul started out a deeply serious person, and he ended his life a deeply serious person. And it's like, why was he so influential on comedy? I think because, again, back to his bullshit detector, because what mattered to him in comedy was that it be true and change, create the kind of laughter that changed people. Right? And then eventually he moved on but he was always interested in the theater. That's where Viola came from, always. That's where Paul came from, always. Improvisation for the theater.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. And it, thinking back to, again, like those early Compass days and things like that, I got the same sense, you're talking about Paul not being interested in commercial theater. The same sense with David Shepard, that the two of them had bigger goals of what they were.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. And, commercial success, okay, that's all right. But we still want to do this, this bigger thing. And
that was never enough. And it was not gonna, yeah.
Yeah. So it was, and then with the two of them, just the common love of Brecht and that kind of progressive socialist theater that again is not what, say, Second City became, or not.
Right.
But by that time, they had both moved on to other things. I just find it's curious because I think so many people entering into improvisation now do so with that notion of a commercial aspect to it, trying to get an audience and trying to get on TV or trying to do this, versus that idea of using the process of improvisation to drive to a deeper purpose. I think is a really interesting thing that not a lot of people seem to be focused on in improv.
I think that's changing. I think that's changing somewhat. It definitely was the norm. I mean, I don't know. I don't really get a lot of students from the improv world.
Right.
There's been a general lack of, it's not going to teach me how to be funny. But, I think that is changing now. I see it changing, and it feels good. It feels great for people to understand that the process of play between people, of connecting people, it changes their outlook on everything. And so the applied improvisation movement and all that stuff, it's been really exciting because people are realizing, oh, well, how do you do that? Oh, you do exercises with people, you get them connecting. And so there's been a rediscovery, I think, of Spolin in the improv world. And unfortunately, not so much Paul's work, because he didn't leave behind writing. And I think that's because he was for him, it was all about Viola. I mean, really, well, I mean, he was just her biggest fan and student, and like booster, and everything he did, every theatrical discovery he made, which were many. He created several forms of theater. People, I don't think the improv world, they even know what story theater is,
Right.
but it was huge. And they probably done it, but they didn't know you know what I mean? Like the way that the methods that Viola created, which do have roots in older forms, but there's so much that she originated that allows people to play together as part of a group without a director, without a writer. And those carry through the ensemble theater movement, the devised theater movement. So many of those things, like, they are Viola. They go back. It's impossible not to be in awe of what she did in some ways. Because I hear of so much influence, and I see so much influence, and people tell me, and Paul was like that, and the ways that the tools that she gave people who spent enough time working with it to create theater out of this are so powerful, because every group brings their own everything to it, and so it changes with the group. But Paul knew all that. Like, he got all that. He was a kid in her workshops when he was 8 years old. Like, he was on the Hull House stage playing with her. So it's like, it was just in his being.
Yeah, it was. When I talked to students about working with Paul, I said, everything that he taught was out of, Viola's book. And I said, but what is not in Viola's book entirely that you got from Paul was like this amazing insight of somebody who had decades and decades of experience with these very games.
That's
and I just remember totally being blown away. Just like, whoa, this is dense, and there's a lot more going on here than I know. Right.
It is. And when you study theater games with Paul, you got a sense, and I try to impart that as well by reading from his notes and talking about what he said and bringing his take on it in, and reading Viola as well, was just how much, how profound her work is, and the connections to, the perennial philosophy, as Aldous Huxley called it, that that focused attention is the only way out of the human condition, that one thing that every culture agrees on, and so many different ways of theatrical expression that that each game points to and illuminates, as like, he was such a great teacher, and hard, he yelled at us too, but he also danced around us. I was like, oh yeah, he yelled, it must have been scary. And a whole generation of people tell me they didn't go talk to him because they were afraid of him, when he was like such a kind guy, wasn't he? I mean, he was really thoughtful, and people missed out.
Yeah. No,
So we're trying to. There's no books of his. There's that my mom is hoping to publish, and there's scripts of his that my mom is hoping to edit and publish. And going to Wisconsin, I'll be able to help a bit with that. And
yeah, that'd be great. Actually, that was my next question: is there enough material there from Paul to get that out? Because it's, again, a really valuable resource. I think that.
I hope so. And also, I'd like to say that, like, one of the I mentioned the rules of improv and that way of teaching improv before, that's about giving people how to do it and then just like directing them through it, which is like literally the opposite of a Spolin thing. It's like, you figure out how to do it on your own because it's experiential learning, and I just side coach. The side coach just side coaches and guides you in the right direction. A lot of that came from Spolin. they took, when I see the teachings that came from these high holy masters of improv, those are Paul and they're Viola in different words. And I want that's just one thing. I want people to know that they're not. Paul was modest in a way that he wouldn't have called himself a guru, and he wouldn't have made those kinds of, but he was also, we also know Paul was Paul. But those teachings didn't always start where people claim they started.
Right. Well, I mean, in improv, I know you and I have talked about this before. I mean, I'm just surprised. You were saying you don't work a lot with improvisers, but I'm also surprised by, when I talk to improvisers about Spolin, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, name rings a bell," kind of thing. And then you have them talk about games they play, and then it's like, well, that's a Spolin game.
That's a Spolin game.
And and they have no idea like the origin of these different games. And it's such
improv, I've said it before, but improv has mother issues. And it's time as a culture that we work on those,
Right.
I think it's only right.
Right.
That we realize that that this art form, whether or not you know it, has a woman originator, and she beat everybody, and in Europe too. And so her, this is a moment that I see her being acknowledged more, and it's really great to see. And but what I ask of people think because these little old ladies, Neva Boyd and Viola, were the originators, they don't need to actually do the work.
Right.
They don't need to do Spolin anymore. I'm sure it's gotten much more interesting. No, it hasn't. Viola and Neva Boyd were radical beyond where we are now. That there was, in the same way, it's hard for us to understand David and Shepard and Paul were so radical they weren't interested in commercial theater, right? We've gotten more conservative as a society in a way than they were at the time. They were really forward thinking. And I'm still finding ways in which her work is beyond anything. So what I ask of the improv world is not to reinvent the wheel. When I went to art school, they told us, don't reinvent the wheel. Picasso already did that.
Right.
Go learn it, and then it'll help you with, the future of what you're doing. It'll help you with to find your voice. But I think we can, I would ask more improv people to actually study Spolin as well as name check her.
Right.
And see what they have to learn about her. And that's why I appreciate you, Randy, so much, because you bring me in and you're such a non-denominational improv person. And I think that's really great. Like you understand what's best from all the different schools, and you made a real point of including Spolin and me for the last few years in your regular rounds. And I just loved working with everyone there. It's so great.
Well, two things. One is I'm going to put that on my business card now. Non-denominational improviser. And I'll give you credit on that.
All right.
And then two, thank you. But it goes back to what you were just saying about not reinventing the wheel. It's like there's all these great resources in Spolin, in Keith Johnstone, in all these teachers. And Martin Buber. So it's like don't I don't have to like do my own variation or recreate it. It's like it's already there. And the more that's out there, the better. That's like the idea with Paul's notes. I mean, Paul's notes would be invaluable to hold up with the Spolin stuff and kind of go, oh, okay, because here's a really great brain that really processes. And that was one of the things I was going to say. I feel, you were saying Paul didn't leave a lot of stuff, and I think it's because he didn't have to reinvent the wheel.
He didn't.
It's like, well, it's all there. So.
But he did leave a lot of notebooks. They're dense, like the word you use. This is dense. They're dense, and they're full of the writers he was reading and the philosophers and the great thinkers, but they always relate back to Viola. So hopefully someday we can get them out there. Hope so.
Yeah, yeah, that would be a great gift to everybody, I think. So we're running a couple minutes over, but I did want to get, and this may be too big a question to answer in a couple minutes, but I'll challenge you, which is, what do you think is the, and maybe it goes to something you said earlier, but I want to hear that your answer, which is, with improvisers not necessarily embracing Spolin as they once did, and it's slowly coming back. I think maybe not even slowly; it's coming back. What are we missing in improvisation? Improvisation itself. So not just as somebody who's taking a workshop, an educator, a therapist, but as an improvisational actor. What's being missed? What's one thing you'd say?
Transformation.
Well, you don't do that.
Transformation.
Yeah.
Transformation of the space. The way the where, slowing down and silence, and the way the where can create connections and bring people together and create those explosions of spontaneity. That just the idea that we don't have to do anything. You stay out of it. Let the focus work for you, and let the explore the who, what, where, and let everything emerge through that and the focus. And it will entering into that, the intuition. And I think, I see some of these notes. They're like, yeah, just get out of your head. And it isn't just a directive. It's a process. You can't just tell someone, you chill out, relax. You gotta take some time with it. And I think people find different ways to do that, but it's worth seeing what Viola did, because she was a great thinker on consciousness. And there's games of hers that are so incredibly important and sophisticated. I don't think ways of actually side coaching ourselves into the present time, slowing everything down so that it all becomes real to us. We're actually truly engaging in the present, being in the where, Paul said, don't pretend to be human, and being human on stage. And when I see a lot of improv that's based on performance, that's missed, because there's a tendency to need to be, obviously your audience expects comedy and you want to deliver, and but maybe your audience might be surprised by a moment of and rearranged the way you are in workshop, right? If we all slow down a little and let some more things emerge. I don't know, that's what I like to see.
Right.
I just let them see a space object, really see it. Transformation, though. A game like Transformation of Relationship, a game where objects can or transformation of objects. Those are, I'm aghast that improvisation leaves those out. And when you think of long form improv and all that, it uses transformations in there on sort of, but that's not it. It's not the same thing. It quickly goes back into, anyways, even some of those, Viola's in there, but it's not credited, of course. But the transformation, just trust in the audience. I'd love to see more of that.
Right.
And I do see it sometimes, and it's beautiful.
Right. Well, even something as simple in the improvisational stage, I love the idea of, wouldn't it be great if we could show more, more humans versus pretending to be human.
Yeah. Paul used to say, you don't have to be funny, humanity's funny. So yeah, you don't have to be, I don't want to see people trying to be funny. It's the last thing I have ever needed to see.
Right.
I got television for that. I think we need to acknowledge we're a different art form, a unique art form.
Right.
We don't need to see and then explore that. Explore and heighten. I want everybody to play, explore and heighten, and let it happen.
All right. Well, we'll end on that, and everyone has their assignment, so go out and explore and heighten
Well, explore and heighten people.
right now. Anyway, Aretha, thank you so much
Thanks, Randy.
for taking the time. It's always a pleasure to see you and talk to you.
Always nice to talk to you too.
And yeah, we do these again every week, 1 o'clock Pacific time. And each week it's a different guest. I always forget my list, so I'm not sure who's next week, but it'll be somebody good, I hope. And we also do a whole variety of shows. Tonight we have a show at 8:30. It's an open improv show at, again, 8:30. So come and check that out. And if you enjoyed this, again, we appreciate your time, taking the time, an hour or so out of your day to watch this. But if you feel like giving a donation, feel free to find the button somewhere there that will allow you to do that. And again, hope you are enjoying it's beautiful here, so get out if you're in Seattle. And thanks again to Aretha Sills.
Thank you, Randy. Bye, everybody.